Hey, what's going on? So, I am in a different location than home currently. I'm currently in El Paso, Texas. Why am I here? The reason is I was given 48 hours notice to pack my bags and come to Fort Bliss or El Paso, Texas, to help out with the Afghan refugees that are currently being processed here. The reason I'm here to help with the refugees is because 2 years ago, before I deployed, I took a Army language test for Dari and Pashto, and I got them added to my official record because I scored high enough on them to get them added to my record. What does that mean that I scored high enough? I am not fluent in Dari, and certainly not in Pashto. I don't have any experience actually speaking the languages to people. Very, very little. During my deployment, I used it a little bit with the small interaction I had with some of our Afghan counterparts. But I learned enough that I was able to score a 0+, 0+ on the Dari test and get it added to my record. The way that works is it's two tests. One is reading and one is listening. So that's what the two numbers represent. You get a number score for the reading and a number score for the listening. And it's on a scale from, don't quote me on this, I believe it's on a scale of like 0 negative up to 3+. And in the Army, to be considered proficient at a language and to the level to where you could get paid for a language is, I believe you have to score 2 or 2+ in both the reading and the listening. So for example, I took the test for Spanish because I learned Spanish as a missionary in the Dominican Republic for 2 years. I'm proficient in that language, I can converse in it, and I scored a 2+ on that test. I don't get paid for the language because the other part of that, in order to get paid for a language in the Army, is you also have to be serving in a position where the language is required. So normally people who serve as linguists or in intelligence, things like that. But I at least wanted to add the languages to my record so that I could communicate to somebody out in the Army, so that people could see when they look at my record that I have this particular set of unique skills, kind of like in the movie Taken. I have a set of specific skills. In addition to taking the proficiency test for Spanish, and then later I took it for Dari, Pashto, German, and French to get those all added to my record. I also took what's called the Defense Language Aptitude Battery, or DLAB. And it's a test where they test your ability to learn a different language. And it's supposed to test your aptitude for learning languages. And the highest you can score on that is a 130. I scored a 123. Like the minimum you have to score to be considered capable of learning the most difficult languages in the world is like a 105, I think, maybe 110. I scored a 123. I darn near almost maxed the test. So I wanted to pad my record with all of these language tests to kind of communicate to promotion boards or people who are looking to maybe hire me to serve in their organization that, hey, this is a skill that I have, that I can learn languages quicker than the average person. And so anyway, so I taught myself Farsi a few years back, just using the Mango Languages app, which you can get for free through your local library, by the way. And they use the Pimsleur learning method, which is a proven method for learning languages. I got my study materials from the language lab at 3rd Special Forces Group when I was assigned to them. So these are like the Green Berets. And the materials they used were the Pimsleur materials. And when I discovered the Mango Languages app and I started using that one, I realized it was the exact same thing as Pimsleur. and you can get it for free if you sign up through your library account. So anyway, so I did Farsi through Mango, and got pretty good at that language. And then a couple years ago, when I joined the SFAB, they sent me to a 2-week-long Dari familiarization course, where I basically learned how to read and write the language. So it's one thing to be able to understand it listening and be able to speak it, but I could never read it or write it. And after I took the 2-week Dari familiarization course, I learned how to read and write it. So now I can use like dictionaries and things like that. So it's more tools in my toolkit to help me learn and speak the language. Anyway, all that to say, right before I deployed to Afghanistan, I went ahead and took the test for Dari and Pashto just to get them added to my record. Fast forward 2 years. Now I'm 3 Corps on Fort Hood did a personnel query of all the people in the Corps who had Dari or Pashto on their records. And they basically mobilized all those people, and they're sending them to Fort Bliss and a couple other locations to help with the refugees. And so that's how my name came up. And yeah, I was literally given 48 hours. And my first shift out at the site where the refugees are is going to be tomorrow night. So I know it's gonna be an adventure. Because here's the thing about learning languages. If you were to ask me what it takes to learn a language, what I discovered, what I figured out when I was a missionary in the Dominican Republic, is it seems like there are three things to every language. There are 3 components to a language that make you capable of speaking it, and speaking it proficiently, and making you sound like a native speaker to the natives, even if you're that good. But I would actually add a 4th thing to that. But I'll start with the first 3. All right, so there's 3 different parts to a language when you're learning a different language. The first one is grammar. All right, and that's like the base of the pyramid. That's where you have to start. You have to learn the grammar, which is like all of the rules for a language, how the language is put together. Think of it as like equations in math, right? In math, once you learn the equations, then you can plug in any numbers you want into those equations, and you can solve them. Like the trick is just learning the equation itself. That's what grammar is in language. Once you learn the rules for how to conjugate verbs, how to form sentences, the word order, once you learn that, that's the biggest thing. That's the base for your language. After that, it's just learning vocabulary. And that's the second part of language, is vocabulary. And that is just the words, just learning the words that you speak. And you don't really think about it, you know, if you only speak one language, like if your native language is English, you don't think about it, all the words that you use throughout the day, just in your normal conversations. For someone who learns a language, they have to learn and memorize every single one of those words at some point before they can really use them casually in casual conversation. And it's a very tedious process. The way I did it as a missionary is every morning I would pick 5 words from my dictionary. They would be more or less random, but there would also be words that were useful. I would just kind of flip through it and I'd find a word like, ooh, that's a good one. I'd pick those 5 words and I wrote them down on my little agenda that I carried in my pocket. And it was like a game for me. Throughout the day, I would try to see how many times I could use those words in my conversation with people. And so sometimes we had fun with it. Like when we would knock on someone's door and we would introduce ourselves to them and tell them we'd like to share a message. And then you would just kind of slip this random word into the spiel that you were giving, you know, and like the people would never catch it, but then your missionary companion would be sitting there just kind of chuckling to himself, you know. But it was a great way to force yourself to learn the word, because you were trying so hard to figure out how to use it, so then it would just stick in your mind that much better. And And then also throughout the day, I would just be aware of words. When I heard something new or saw something new for the first time, and it looked like a word that would be really handy to know, I would jot them down. I would add them to my list of words to learn and use. So that's vocabulary. That is your word base, the words that you use. The third part of learning a language is working on the accent. And some languages are more difficult than others. I know, like with Mandarin Chinese, it is crucial. It is a central part of the language. Part of the grammar really is your intonation, your voice inflection. It can have different meanings. That wasn't so much the case with Spanish. However, Spanish does have some things that are hard for people to catch on, like the trilled R's, like the arroz. Like for some people that was hard to do. So for me, and what I learned on the mission is, it seemed like every single missionary had one or two areas that they were strong in, and then they were weak in the rest. And it was different for everybody. I struggled with the grammar and the vocabulary at the start of my mission, but the accent I nailed. So when I was reading things, like we would read in class at the Missionary Training Center from the scriptures out loud in Spanish. And people would stumble and stutter and struggle to pronounce the words, but I was able to just read them. And people would marvel because they knew I was struggling to learn the language, but when they heard me speaking it, reading it, they'd be like, dang man, you sound like almost native. You've got a really good accent. So that was my strength. Later on in the mission field, the grammar and the vocabulary started to come for me, but I had to work really hard to get to that point, and I really did struggle with it. Some of the other missionaries I knew, the grammar and the vocabulary just seemed to come naturally for them, and it was kind of frustrating for me. It was a bit disheartening. I'm like, why am I struggling with this so much? But they didn't. But yeah, so it was different for everybody. Everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. Now, so those were the three basic parts of the language that I realized as a missionary, that those are the three components of a language that people work on to improve their ability to speak that language. Now, I would add on top of all of that, the key really to becoming proficient in using a language is you have to be immersed in it. You have to be thrown into a situation where it is the only language you can use for an extended period of time, and you are forced to figure it out. You have no crutches. So in the Missionary Training Center, they would have posters hanging up everywhere that said, speak your language, and they would constantly push that on us as, hey, you need to speak your language. And after about the first 1 or 2 weeks, our instructors wouldn't even respond to us in English. If we had a question for them and we tried talking to them in English, they would just kind of look at us all confused and go like, what? And we would have to talk to them in the language that we were learning. So that's where I'm currently at with Dari. I've learned Farsi, which is very similar to Dari. I studied it and studied it and studied it. I've become very familiar with the grammar. I learned a decent amount of vocabulary, although I haven't retained it because I haven't used it in a couple of years. I learned a bunch of vocabulary for Dari a couple of years ago, but I have not been immersed in the language. I have not been forced to use these languages at all. So that's why I don't consider myself proficient in those languages yet. And so here I am on Fort Bliss, Texas, and my mission is to mingle with the Afghan refugees and talk to them. And see what it is they need and just kind of help them out however we can. So it's going to be an adventure. I'm basically learning the language while I'm here by immersion. I know the grammar, I know a little bit of vocabulary. Now I'm going to be immersed in it, and I'm going to be forced to speak it and figure it out. I've got a dictionary I brought with me, So I should be able to work my way through it. It's going to be exhausting mentally, but I'm also really glad to be here because watching the news the last month or so coming out of the Kabul airport, it was breaking my heart, and I really wished I could be there helping in some form or fashion. And so I'm actually kind of happy, kind of excited to be given this opportunity to help out here on this side. Now that they've escaped from Afghanistan and they're here and they're trying to get into America, you know, they're trying to get through the gate, so to speak. I'm just glad that I'm able to be here and help out in some form or fashion, even if it's in a small amount. So that's why I'm on Fort Bliss, and yeah, we'll see what happens while I'm here. It's gonna be fun. I'll talk to y'all later.